They say some houses never let you leave. When Liam inherited his uncle's estate, he didn't expect the shadows to come alive. In less than 24 hours, his home turned into a living nightmare, etching glowing curses into his flesh. To save Eliza, he made the ultimate sacrifice, pushing her through a melting portal before the house sealed itself into a solid block of stone. He's gone. The house is a tomb. But the trees are still whispering his name. The whispering pines of Hollow Creek, the new house, the winding road through the dense, dark forests of Hollow Creek felt endless. Eliza and Liam were moving from the bustling city of Philadelphia to a secluded, old Victorian house, a property Liam had inherited from an eccentric uncle he barely knew. They were excited, seeking the quiet and the change, but as the trees thickened, Eliza felt a strange, chilling dread settled in her chest. Their new home, a towering structure with weather-beaten grey wood and Gothic arches, seemed to watch them with dark skeletal windows. "It's perfect, Liz," Liam said, his voice echoing in the empty hall. He was captivated, but Eliza was unsettled by the overwhelming silence of the place. "It's substantial," she managed, trying to share his enthusiasm but failing. A cold draft brushed against her cheek, even though the windows were shut. Sounds from the shadows. The first night was an ordeal. As the moon cast long, unsettling shadows through the rooms, the house began to speak. It started with subtle creaks and soft whispers that seemed to slide along the walls. Initially, they brushed it off as the house settling. "It's just an old house finding its footing," Liam said, his hand comforting on her shoulder, as they huddled under a thick blanket in their dusty bedroom. But the sounds grew louder, more insistent. In the early hours of the morning, Eliza woke to a faint, mournful crying, a sound that seemed to emanate from the walls of the upstairs hallway. She clutched Liam, who was already awake, listening intently. "I hear it too," he whispered, his eyes wide. They went exploring, following the sound. It led them to the locked door of the attic. As they stood there, a whisper, distinctly masculine and cold, echoed right behind Eliza. "You shouldn't have come." She spun around, but the hallway was empty. The cold hand of the attic, determined to find the source of the distress, Liam spent the next day trying keys from his uncle's old ring. The attic door, thick with layers of dust and rust, finally groaned open. A wave of freezing, stale air hit them. The attic was a chaotic landscape of covered furniture and dusty boxes. In one corner, they found a small, locked chest made of dark metal. Next to it was an old, leather-bound diary. Liam opened the diary. It belonged to his uncle's wife, Clara, who had seemingly disappeared decades ago. The entries were increasingly frantic, speaking of the man in the walls, who promised her gifts, but demanded a terrible price. The final entry was broken and terrifying. "He wants me. The pines call my name. I'll have to go." A sudden crash made them jump. A heavy box of old mirrors had toppled over. Eliza looked into the largest shard. Behind her reflection, she saw a fleeting, gaunt figure, pale as death, standing among the boxes. It wasn't just a shadow. The Whispering Grove. They fled downstairs, the images from the diary playing over and over. That night, the house felt even more hostile. The floorboards above them creaked as if with heavy steps. Shadows in their rooms seemed to elongate and dance. The weeping returned, louder and more desperate. "It wants my soul," a voice, clearly Clara's, whispered in the cold air. Eliza noticed something strange. Every time she heard the whispers, she felt a strong, unnatural pull from the whispering pine, the dense forest that bordered their property. She realized the woods weren't just background noise. They were part of it. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She walked to the window. The woods, bathed in eerie moonlight, seemed to sway and sing with a mournful tune. "Come, we are waiting," a chorus of voices sighed. The final plea. Terrified, Liam decided they needed to leave. He started packing, but as he went to the attic for more boxes, a primal scream ripped through the silence. "Liam!" Eliza ran to the foot of the stairs. A cold wind was whipping down the staircase, carrying with it a faint, rotten smell. Liam came tumbling down, pale and shaking. His hands were covered in strange, glowing script. "He was there," Liam choked, his eyes darting. "He told me, I'm the key." He then showed her what he'd found. Inside the locked chest was a ritualistic dagger and a strange, old book. On the floor of the attic, written in the same glowing script, was a pentagram. Clara's voice, now desperate and clear, filled the room. "He's trapped here. The woods are his cage. But he needs a host to leave. He chose your family. You have to finish what I couldn't." The instructions were simple but harrowing. To trap the entity again, a sacrifice of blood, a small but meaningful offering, had to be made on the pentagram before dawn. The cage. As the last few hours of night waned, the sounds in the house became almost unbearable. The entity was fighting, its power growing. They could feel its presence, cold and violent, all around them. Liam and Eliza huddled together in the kitchen, the ritual dagger on the table. The sun's first rays were just breaking through the trees. "I can't let it take you, Liz," Liam said, picking up the dagger. "We have to do this together," Eliza insisted. With a deep breath, Liam cut his palm, and Eliza did the same, mixing their blood. Together, they made their way back to the attic, ignoring the whispers that tried to pull them towards the woods, the figures that darted past their vision. In the attic, the script on the floor was pulsing with an intense, sickly light. The figure in the mirror had come to life, its hands clawing at the glass, its form more solid than before. Liam and Eliza raised their bleeding hands and spoke the words Clara had left in her diary. The air crackled. The ground shook. The form in the mirror screeched, a sound that wasn't human, and then was sucked back. The glass shattering into thousands of pieces, the glowing script on the floor, and their palms faded. The house went still, a deep, true silence that felt like a release. The whispering pines beyond their window no longer felt like a threat, but a guardian. Liam and Eliza, pale and shaken, embraced. They knew their ordeal was over, but they would never forget the whispers in the dark, the cold presence in the walls, and the terrible secret that now lay buried within the whispering pines of Hollow Creek. The entity unleashed. The reprieve was short-lived. Just as the shattering glass fell silent, the bedroom door downstairs slammed shut with a violence that shook the entire house. Clang. The front door followed. They were locked in. The entity wasn't gone. It was furious. The silence evaporated, replaced by a low, vibrating hum that made their teeth ache. The temperature dropped sharply, until their breath fogged in the cold air. The shadows that had merely elongated before now detached from the walls. Formless, shifting shapes, darker than ink, slithered across the floor, pulling around the staircase they had just ascended. "We have to get out of here, Liam," Eliza cried, pulling him towards the locked kitchen door. He looked down at his palm. The glowing script, which had faded moments ago, was beginning to etch itself back onto his skin, like a tattoo being painfully carved. "I don't think it's letting me go," he whispered, staring at his hand. The mournful weeping in the walls had changed. It was no longer Clara's plea. It was a hungry, ancient roar that vibrated the very wood of the house. The entity was no longer in the walls. It was the house itself. The price of freedom. The hum grew until it was a physical force, pressing against their ears. The shadow pool solidified. A hand, pale and gaunt like the one in the attic mirror, reached out from the mass of shadows on the floor and wrapped around the banister. It wasn't a figure, but parts of one coalescing into existence. Liam staggered. His body jerked violently, as if pulled by invisible wires. He began to drift back towards the stairs. "Run, Eliza. You have to leave." "No, I'm not leaving you." She grabbed his free arm, fighting this supernatural tug-of-war. But the kitchen door, their intended exit, wasn't locked from the outside. The wood around the frame began to splinter and melt, as if corroded by a dark acid. From the using wood, more of the script appeared, pulsing in sync with the script on Liam's hand and the growing script on the attic floor above. A voice, deeper and more terrifying than Clara's, resonated directly in Eliza's mind. "The blood bonded you. He is the key, but you are the anchor. One must stay for the other to leave." The choice was impossible. The hollow creak deal. Eliza looked from the melting door, which led outside, to Liam, who was nearly engulfed by the creeping shadow forms. His eyes were wide with a silent plea. She realized what the script meant now. It wasn't just a trap, it was a contract. The previous owner, Liam's uncle, must have made a similar deal to keep the entity contained, a deal that required his own confinement. That's why he was eccentric, why he was alone. "I can't live with myself if I leave you," Eliza wept, struggling against the entity's pull. Liam, fighting for control, managed to grip her shoulders. "But I can't live knowing I'm the reason you're trapped here forever. You have your art, your family, you have to live." The door was completely gone, replaced by a swirling void that revealed the forest. The whispering pines were silent now, awaiting. The voice spoke again, impatient. "The sun rises. The cage resets. The choice must be made." The sentinel of the pines. In a final, heartbreaking move, Liam shoved Eliza with all his might towards the open void. As she stumbled forward, the shadow masses violently pulled Liam backward. He hit the stairs, and the script on his hand pulsed blindingly. Eliza twisted in the doorway, reaching back for him. "Liam!" But the void she had stepped through was not a door. It was a barrier. She passed through the swirling vortex, and instantly, she was outside, standing on the dewy grass. She spun around. The Gothic arches of the house were gone, replaced by a wall of impenetrable, seamless dark grey stone. There was no door. There was no window. Inside, she could still hear his muffled voice calling her name, then a final, horrifying screech of triumph from the entity. Then silence. Eliza stood alone on the lawn, the sun finally touching the tops of the whispering pines. She wasn't just a survivor. She was the only witness. Weeks later, the police declared Liam missing. They found no trace of him inside or outside the house, which was now an empty, derelict property. They found no script, no secret room. Eliza stayed in Hollow Creek for a while, staying at a small inn. She couldn't leave. Every dawn, she walked to the border of the whispering pines. The forest, which once seemed to sway with a mournful tune, was now always perfectly still when she arrived. But when she listened closely, she could hear it. A single, quiet whisper drifting from the deep woods. It wasn't Clara's voice, nor the entity's roar. It was familiar. It was a soft, comforting sigh, like a wind that carried a promise. And she knew, somewhere in that dark grove, Liam was waiting. He had become part of the whispering pines, a final guardian, keeping the entity contained, watching over her from the quiet heart of the forest. And sometimes in her dreams, she saw his pale hand, now marked with a different kind of script, gently guiding travelers away from the dark and back towards the light.